All right, cool. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mark, just first of all, for organizing all of this. And I think you overheard everything I said, but how GGTC just does an amazing job with the community and with all these different types of events. And it's been great just, working at UCAN and working with you guys as a sponsor of the club to be able to put things like this together, because, you guys are just so responsive and so awesome with the community and friendly and engaged with the things that you have going on. So very cool. And thanks for helping us get this all coordinated. And I work for UCAN. I'll probably end up sharing my story a little bit about how I came to UCAN and share some other information about it. But really the star of the show here is Heidi, and she's fantastic. She's a registered dietitian. She's an endurance athlete herself. I think you've done, I don't even know how many, Ironman triathlons and ultra runs and all sorts of stuff that you've done, Heidi. Maybe you can share a minute on that. But yeah, an incredible endurance athlete herself. And so she really gets it. She really understands the endurance athlete and is able to speak both from the perspective of science, but also from the perspective of really practical advice. And you'll see that tonight. And it's very well spoken, really good at presenting some really valuable information that you'll all find will be helpful in your own triathlon training and racing from a nutrition standpoint, the fourth discipline of triathlon. So without further ado here, I'll kick it over to Heidi.
Thank you, Matt. And I think you need to allow me to share my screen.
Yes, thank you. Let's see here. I'm just going to do that. All right, you should be able to do it now.
Cool. Yep, there we go. All right.
And while Heidi's getting this set up, just so that everybody knows what to expect, we'll have about maybe 30 to 40 minutes worth of presentation. And at the end, we'll have room for Q&A, plenty of Q&A. So bring your questions and think of your questions throughout this. Because it is a relatively small group too, we can also take questions sort of maybe at some stopping points throughout the way too. So yeah, I'll kick it back to you, Heidi.
Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I just a little intro, with how I got into nutrition as well as endurance sport and kind of how I came to UCAN. I actually grew up playing soccer and played semi-professionally and collegiately. I switched to track and cross country in college and very quickly fell in love with running. And from there, it was kind of a dovetail of I was track and cross country and I grew up in the mountains. And so trail running became kind of second nature once I would go home. I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, and so I had the mountains out my back door. And so really exploded into trail running for a while. And then I had some friends say at a physical therapy clinic that I work at say, you love endurance stuff, you would dig triathlons. And so I kind of started getting into triathlons, and that got me into cyclocross racing. And so I've definitely dabbled in and out of a variety of endurance sport, from triathlon to trail running and a variety of other things. And I think Matt said it well. I got into nutrition because I experienced kind of how nutrition had an impact on my performance and my teammates' performance as a collegiate athlete. And, my passion for working with athletes grew and grew and grew. And I think, one of the reasons why I love doing what I do is because I do get to bring both like this, my kind of science brain, but also my personal experience. And I kind of help bridge that gap between, well, yes, this is what science says, but like, is that actually practical when you're out on the bike or on the trail? Because there definitely is a gap there. And so I really do try and bring kind of my personal experience to my work. And that's, I specialize in endurance athletes as well as female athletes, and I deal with kind of relative energy deficiency and some disordered eating. Again, like all kind of bringing in my own background and kind of just giving me that, more of a unique understanding and really being able to empathize with kind of what my athletes are going through. So super excited to talk to you guys about this. And so yeah, without further ado, fueling as a triathlete, what we call the fourth discipline of triathlon. So, oftentimes people will, athletes will they check all these boxes. I've hired a coach. I'm doing everything I need to do for recovery. I'm training harder than I've ever trained, but like I'm still falling short. And there has, oftentimes we do say that nutrition is the most impactful yet the most neglected component of a lot of athletes training. We don't really think about what I eat as, being part of my training program. We don't put as much effort into building out my nutrition plan as I do critiquing the training and the warm up and the efforts and the cool down and the recovery. And there just isn't that much effort that goes into the nutrition component. And, when we really think about it, like that is like what is going in your body is what's going to impact what you're able to do with your body. And some people may just focus on specifically, oh, well, I'm going to carb load before a race, or I only need to hydrate, or they might, just really focus on what they're doing specifically, in a race. But when we really break it down, what you're eating during training is such a small portion or small percentage of the total amount of energy you're taking in throughout the day. And so a lot of athletes do neglect just daily nutrition. And again, like what a huge impact your daily nutrition can have on your performance. Like that connection oftentimes isn't made, and it really can be that missing link for a lot of athletes. So when it comes to being a triathlete or an endurance athlete, there are a lot of challenges that come with it. One of them is, or we kind of have, increased issues of increased energy needs, huge increase in energy needs, obviously, depending on the distance that you're doing and with, where you are in your training season, that's going to vary. But with this increased energy needs, you're also going to have an increased risk for what we call low energy availability or relative energy deficiency in sport. And I'll get into what that means on the next slide. You also have increased risk for things like GI upset, risk for bonking, again, roller coaster blood sugars. A lot of this is going to depend on the types of fuel that you're using in training and how you're choosing to feed throughout the day. And then risk for hyponatremia, or essentially low blood sodium. And that oftentimes can come from athletes overhydrating with just water, and so neglecting the value of electrolytes and sodium in the athlete's diet. We can have decreased appetite because exercise decreases our appetite. And so that again can kind of tag into these increased energy needs paired with decreased appetite can really cause a big problem. We have decreased time for daily feeding, especially if you're busy with work or if you're a parent or whatever it might be. Oftentimes your own nutrition gets neglected as time gets pulled to a lot of other things. And again, you're focusing on training and recovery and not necessarily thinking about, well, am I actually getting fuel in my body, whether it's before or after. You have decreased hydration status, decreased bone density and hormonal signaling. That can again come from this issue of not meeting your overall energy needs. And the hormonal signaling is something that can happen very quickly and very early on. And then the bone density thing is something that is kind of more of a long-term impact. And again, I'll talk about that next slide. And then we see decreased microbiome diversity. And essentially what that means is poor gut health. When it comes down to it, probiotics are all the rage these days. And really what that means is having a healthy balance of bacteria in our gut that helps with metabolism and digestion and long-term chronic health and all of these different things. And we know that like an overly processed high sugar diet can cause poor microbiome diversity. And we know that a lot of sports nutrition products are made of just very simple sugars. And so they have found that athletes might have poor microbiome diversity compared to the rest of the population. Same thing with dental hygiene. They find that athletes have poor dental hygiene compared to the rest of the population, just because of this constant excess presence of sugars in the mouth and in the gut. Few other challenges that kind of pertain specifically to training and racing are just the timing of, fueling and how you're going to adjust that timing, how to carry nutrition, whether it's on the run or on the bike, what to do before, the climate that you're in, and having to consider is what I usually have. Is it going to melt? Is it going to freeze? Like, is it going to actually be, am I going to be able to eat it in the climate that I'm in? Depending on what elevation you are, you're going to be better at, processing, digesting, metabolizing carbohydrates versus fats. So again, like all those climate considerations. Fuel palatability is a big one. A lot of people get flavor fatigue, especially if you're using a lot of sweet, kind of fruity flavored sports nutrition products. By the end of that, your third leg of your triathlon, you're on the run, you get nauseous at the thought of something fruity, and that's going to prevent you from adequately fueling during, at the end of that race when you need it. And so really making sure that you're being intentional about getting a variety of like textures, flavors, things that are salty, because again, you really need to make sure that whatever you have on you is going to continue to sound good for the duration of your event. And then the bike to run transition, which can be tricky for some individuals, especially if running isn't their kind of background, if running is a new thing to them with triathlon. Because if you're a cyclist, generally speaking, like, you can pretty much stomach anything on the bike. You're not running and jostling up and down, and but all of a sudden you have to go off the bike and you have to run. And so understanding kind of how to time the fuel that you're taking in on the bike so that you don't end up with gut distress when you hop off the bike and all of a sudden have to go run a 10K, a half marathon, a marathon, whatever it ends up being. So low energy availability and relative energy deficiency in sport, or RETs. Really what this comes down to is this mismatch in I'm not taking in enough energy to meet the energy demand of my training. And what that does ultimately is it causes just a high stress load on the body. When I'm not taking in enough nutrition, my body gets stressed. When my body gets stressed, I produce cortisol, which is a stress hormone. I produce a stress hormone at high levels. There's a lot of things that can happen. One of the primary things that can happen is hormonal shutdown of all the other important hormones in my body. And that can be reproductive hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. It can be bone regulating hormones like IGF-1. There's, a whole milieu of hormones. But if all of a sudden my body needs to constantly be pumping out cortisol, which is a hormone, it's going to essentially steals all the building blocks from all the other important hormones that are going in my body, which is where you can see, again, a lot of endocrine disruption. Women can lose their menstrual cycles. My immune system can shut down. I have a lot of metabolic issues, and because my body, again, if it's not getting enough nutrition, it's going to slow down my metabolism because it needs to conserve energy. Your heart is going to slow down. There's this myth that an athlete's heart is, a low heart rate is an athlete's heart, and that's oftentimes a misnomer and can be really a dangerous assumption, because it can also be a sign of low energy availability. And so really just being very, very intentional about meeting your energy needs in training. And I'm really going to kind of to what that looks like over the next couple slides. So solutions. So we talked about the challenges 2 slides ago, and now I'm really going to cover the solutions for the rest of the presentation. Solution number 1 is performance plates and metabolic efficiency training, which really covers kind of all of them. It's nice. You can solve most of the challenges with one solution. And when I work with my athletes, I work on what I call performance plates in kind of a metabolic efficiency model. And as you can see here, the ratio of what's on your plate is going to change based on your training load. And that, I don't really encourage my athletes to track calories. I don't necessarily have them pull out measuring cups and food scales and weigh and measure everything, because it's impractical, it's inconvenient, it's annoying. And for a lot of people, especially because athletes are a bit type A, it can end up causing some disordered eating or eating disorders down the road, like some really unhealthy attachments to some unnecessary habits. Because again, if you're attached to measuring cups or MyFitnessPal or a food scale, you're allowing that thing to dictate how much you're allowed to eat instead of just intuitively listening to your body. So I really like to use these performance plates to gauge, hey, like I know I need these food groups with pretty much all my meals. It's just the ratio of what they look like on my plate based on my training load. And so just being able to adjust them, based on kind of what your training looked like that day. And you see these hands next to the plates. And I like to use the hand model, which is where the metabolic efficiency training piece comes in. And oftentimes we're looking at a 1-to-1 ratio of carbohydrates to protein. And so generally I say, okay, let's protein first, because oftentimes protein gets neglected in meals, especially earlier in the day. And so I'm going to do a hand worth of protein. I'm going to match that with a hand worth of carbs. And then throwing in, some fruits and veggies. Oftentimes our fats are kind of included in with that protein source, whether it's a plant-based or an animal-based protein. The fats oftentimes find their way in there. If it's cooked veggies, they may be cooked in oil. But generally just using that 1-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein for most of your meals and snacks most days. If you've got a really, really hard training day, you may need to up that to a 2-to-1 ratio. But again, just using that hand model can really, really help, not only like using the performance plates to make sure you're taking in like fueling according to your training and not just fueling kind of willy-nilly, but then again using that hand model to kind of establish some of that blood sugar balance. So I talk about metabolic efficiency training, and what is it anyways? It's really nutrition and training principles, specifically nutrition. We say that nutrition makes up about 70% of metabolic efficiency training. So nutrition and training principles to optimize your blood sugar balance, your metabolism, your body composition, your fuel storage utilization during exercise, and its ability to reduce GI distress or stomach distress. Metabolic efficiency training is not a low carb diet. It's not a low calorie diet, and is not saying sugar is completely off limits. Again, like these are kind of misnomers of, like metabolic efficiency training is the keto diet, or it's a low carb diet, or it's a very restrictive low calorie diet. No, like you need to be meeting your calorie needs as triathletes. Like this is not a restrictive low calorie diet. It is a carbohydrate balanced, blood sugar stabilizing, way of eating that allows your body to become more efficient at using the fat stores that you have in your body instead of immediately going to your carbohydrate stores. And really what happens when we exercise is we're always using a combination of fats and carbohydrates for the most part, unless you're in an all-out sprint and then you're using 100% carbohydrates, or you're sleeping and then you're going to be using mostly fats. But, when we're looking at this, exercise, we're using a combination of carbs and fats. If we're taking in a lot of simple carbohydrates all the time and my blood sugar is going all over the place, my body's going to be needing to pull from those carbohydrate stores that I have. And that's going to be my muscle, and that's going to be my liver, and then my blood sugar. And we have a really limited supply of carbohydrate stores in our body, really only enough to last us a couple hours. But on the opposite end, we have over 80,000 calories worth of fats. And that's, you can go a really long time on that many calories. And so the goal of metabolic efficiency training is to make your body better at using those fat stores at a higher intensity of exercise, because generally the higher the intensity is, the more carbohydrates you're going to be needing. And so this essentially just trains your body to be able to tap into those fat stores more and save your carbohydrate stores for the end of the race when you really need them. Metabolic efficiency training really, really emphasizes stable blood sugar levels. And oftentimes in our kind of what we'll call a standard American diet, we see these ups and downs a lot. And that can really end up putting you in kind of an energy deficit, feeling sluggish at the end of the day. You've got a lot of cravings throughout the day. Your energy's all over the place. Because if I have a simple carbohydrate, say I have even something like, if I have just a banana for breakfast, my blood sugar is going to spike because banana is a simple sugar and I don't have anything with it. My blood sugar is going to crash. So I'm going to be hungry. I'm either going to go for something that's quick in energy, so high in sugar, or I'm going to go for something with caffeine, an energy drink or a coffee. Neither of which are adequate. And so when you start your day off with this big blood sugar spike and crash, that's going to kind of be how the rest of your day goes. And so really it's understanding what are the type of carbs that I should be eating throughout the day, and how do I balance them with proteins to really optimize that blood sugar stability. And so that's going to kind of be what I'm going to get into over the next couple slides. So typical diet, oftentimes like instant oatmeal, super quick and easy, the instant packets, even if it's old fashioned oats, but like oatmeal and water, fast breakfast. Lunch might be a sandwich, fruit or chips or both, maybe a soda, maybe water, maybe nothing. Snacks, you know, this could be one snack or it could be a lot of snacks. Again, if like I'm just having simple, easy to eat carbohydrates, then I might have a bag of chips and that is going to keep me like it's going to keep me satisfied for 30 minutes. And then all of a sudden I'm hungry again. So I have fruit. And then I'm hungry again in 30 minutes. And so if I'm feeling lethargic, I'm going to go get a sweetened coffee drink or an energy drink. So again, you see these, you know, big spikes and crashes in blood sugar. Dinner might be spaghetti and meatballs. And then I still got the munchies at night, even though I probably had enough calories throughout the day. But because my blood sugar has been so up and down, it's leaving me with this kind of need to get my blood sugar up. So to shift that into a more metabolically efficient diet, it doesn't take a lot of change. It's just making your oatmeal with something like milk, like whole milk, or like UCAN's protein plus energy. Having some nut butter in there to give you some fats and some protein and some staying power. So it's upping the fiber, it's upping the protein and the fat. Lunch sandwich is still great, but let's add some more fiber with veggies and hummus. If you do a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, then having like a Greek yogurt to give you a little more protein. If you have a turkey sandwich, go with some fruit. Snacks, again, having snacks that are more metabolically efficient. So mixed nuts are like one of the most well-balanced foods on the planet. They have everything: carbs, proteins, fats, all in this lovely, delicious little package. So mixed nuts can be a great snack midday. If you've got a workout later in the day, something like a UCAN bar can be great. Something like a UCAN bar can be great. It's kind of a slow releasing carbohydrate. So you've got that stable energy. There's a little bit of protein and fat in there as well. Again, still stick with spaghetti and meatballs. Just make sure you've got that 1-to-1 carb to protein ratio with your hands. Have a side salad. And then right before you go to bed, having a snack that is going to optimize your recovery overnight as well as your sleep. And so you can do melatonin producing foods, which is things like dark chocolate, oats, bananas, walnuts, tart cherry, and combine those with something like UCAN protein. And because having protein before bed allows your muscles to actually recover. There's also a lot of research that shows if your energy needs are really high, your sleep quality is going to be a lot poorer if you go to bed hungry. So we know that if you combine the melatonin producing foods and protein right before bed, you're going to sleep more deeply, you're going to get to bed quicker, and you're going to have less sleep latency, which means you're going to wake up less during the night. Plus you're bathing your muscles in this rich protein source, which is, again, like, it's going to allow you to recover, because that's what the goal of sleep is to allow your body to rest and rebuild and recover for the next day. Moving into hydration, really, you know, my goal here is just to help people understand that your basic hydration needs, so divide your body weight by 2. That's how many fluid ounces you should be drinking during the day. Adding about 16 to 24 ounces of fluids per hour that you exercise. So if you exercise for an hour, have an extra 16 to 24 ounces on top of that. And then also, second, that you should be hydrating with more than just water. Water necessarily doesn't cut it all the time. Having electrolytes in your water, unsweetened tea, coffee, milk is one of the most hydrating beverages that's out there. Some carbonated water, kombucha, smoothies, like all of these things that contribute to your hydration beyond just water, especially if you lose a lot of salt in your sweat. You're going to need a little extra something beyond just water in your hydration. And a great way to check your hydration status is your urine color. So aiming for a color of pale lemonade is kind of a goal. If you got completely clear, you're overhydrated. And if you're pushing kind of that apple juice color, you're not quite hydrated enough. And then last bit before I jump to Matt is just kind of tapping on some of the other little solutions, is looking at the ingredients in your products. Again, wanting to make sure you're staying away from things like fiber. High fiber bars, things like Kind bars can really cause a lot of gut distress. Making sure that if you're sensitive to caffeine, checking in on the caffeine and making sure, okay, does this product have caffeine or not? What type of carbohydrates are in it? I'll get into kind of the types of carbohydrates when I touch on training nutrition. Like I said, fuel variety is really important. So having sweet and salty, combination of carbs, proteins, fats, liquids, and solids. Being climate conscious, just in the idea of, hey, like, is the product that I'm going to be using, is it going to stand up in the climate that I'm going into? Training your gut, giving yourself adequate time to use the nutrition and training that you're going to plan to use during your race. And then getting help from a professional, whether that's me or another sports dietitian, but finding someone who specializes in athletes like you, to really make sure that you're meeting all of your needs. All right, Matt, you're up.
Cool. Yeah, that was fantastic. Actually, we have a question, so I'm gonna toss that question to you before, and then I'll come in as basically the case study, because as you were talking, like, there's so much that you talk about, and it, like, every time we do a presentation together, we've done a number of them. It just reminds me, like, how many things I've done wrong over the years, and then how many things I've fixed. So yeah,
you and me both.
Made so many mistakes, and fortunately, I've learned from those mistakes because of the expertise of people like you that have kind of gotten me on the straight and narrow, at least. But here's the question. It's from Daniel, and is there ever a place for fasted workouts? For example, an easy zone 2 run or spin in the morning. Does this contribute to any fat burning metabolic advantage down the line, or just stresses the body unnecessarily?
That is a really good question, and I'm glad you asked. I mean, I'm of the mentality that fasted training is not a good choice, especially for women. I would say even for men. So when I was talking about this low energy availability idea, we know that, like, even if by the end of the day you end up in positive energy balance, so hey, like, by the end of the day I met my energy demands of training. There's a lot of recent research that's come out with both men and women where really big within day energy deficits can be just as harmful or more harmful than, like, where you end up at the bank at the end of the day. And so if you have a training session in the morning, even if it's relatively easy, you think you haven't eaten all night long, so it's maybe been what, you had dinner at 6, maybe you had to finish by 7, something like that. And then you're getting up, say it's been 12 hours, you're dehydrated, most of your your carbohydrate stores are mostly depleted. And what this does is it puts undue stress on the body. So cortisol goes up. Cortisol already is a bit high in the morning anyway, just because of its kind of how it rises and falls with our circadian rhythms. And so we've already got a little bit of high cortisol level when we wake up in the morning. And then if we go and train, that's making our body stress. It's causing this, like, add-on effect of stress. And so you can end up with this big energy deficit early in the day. And that alone can begin to cause hormonal disruption within 1 or 2 days. And every body is different. And so it doesn't happen with everybody, but I generally don't recommend fasted training. Like I said, especially for women. Women are a lot more sensitive than men when it comes to fasted training for a variety of reasons I won't get into today because we don't have time. But yeah, so I would say 100% women should not do fasted training. I generally don't recommend that men do either, because it does impact testosterone as well, and that can cause bone issues and a variety of things. And so do you need to have a big meal? 100% no. You're looking at like 100, 150 calories, if it's early in the morning. It can be liquid. I kind of do what I call a powerccino, which is essentially coffee and UCAN energy plus protein, blended with a little, like, hand whisk thing. And it's just like a little latte. And, like, do something like that. You can also use, like, milk, if you drink milk, or, plant-based milk with a little, like, protein. You can do a variety of things, but getting in something is really important. And especially, you do, depending on what type of product you use, it still can allow you to enhance, if you're doing kind of easy zone 2 training, you still can enhance your metabolic efficiency by keeping your blood sugar stable instead of spiking them. And so choosing something like a UCAN, or having something that's higher in protein and lower in carbohydrate for an easy zone 2 session is going to keep your blood sugar stable and not spike them, that's what's going to allow for kind of that fat adaptation that we talk about. And the other thing is, you know, even if you're doing zone 2, you think like you're going to be able to train harder, better than like if you're fueled up than if you're fasted. And your muscles are going to be able to recover better if you're fueled up than if you're fasted. And so there's a lot of benefits to just taking in a little something. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a big meal, but you should take in a little something. Yeah, so that's my 2 cents.
That's another one of those things I was doing wrong. Just throw it on the list. Fasted training.
Yep.
I was doing quite a bit of that. And a lot of that was before I discovered UCAN. And I was always struggling to eat anything before my workouts because, especially runs, because of all that jostling and the higher heart rate. And especially if it was hot, the heat exacerbating any of that stomach distress and like heavy stomach and cramping that I would feel. So I was like scared to eat anything before my workouts, whether it be a morning run or back in high school. Practice was 3 o'clock or whatever after school, and I would eat a really, really light lunch, sometimes almost non-existent lunch. And so I'd go into it, my practice, like, 7 hours fasted, because the last time I ate was at 6 something in the morning. So that was definitely not setting me up right. And then I did a lot of morning fasted runs too, again, because I didn't have something that I could rely on that would be easy on the stomach until I discovered UCAN, which was, years into my athletic career. I was 2014 when I first discovered it. So now I don't do much in the way of fasted training. Now, actually, I wanted to share one slide which relates exactly to what you were just saying about blood sugar control. And here we go. So you should be able to see that okay. The slide here, or the graph here, this fat oxidation one, shows you how, well, maybe I'll even take it a step back and show how when you take something sugary, like in this case, it's maltodextrin, you see there's a spike and crash in blood sugar levels when you take maltodextrin. And you would probably see a similar type profile if you just ate something like just a banana, or you just gnawed on a bagel, or like a plain bagel. You'd have this spike and crash type of profile. And that causes insulin to rise, which is shown in this chart here. You can see the dotted line. And then that impacts fat oxidation rates, which you see here in the blue line. So fat oxidation is suppressed here. You can see it's not as high as it is with something like superstarch or something where you're fasted. Right, so it's at its peak when this is just water, when you're fasted, but then you have the other downsides that Heidi was talking about, which is this potential low energy availability. Like, it's not really a sustainable thing. I mean, if you were absolutely trying to maximize your fat oxidation, then you would probably do a bunch of fasted training. But if your goal is actually performance and health, which it definitely is for me, then you want to be taking something that's going to keep your blood sugar stable, like superstarch, which is the red line here, and which has an impact where you're still burning fat at a great rate, but you're also getting the energy that you need.
Yeah, and not causing all that, waterfall effect of hormonal disruption and psychological and immunological and cardiology and all those issues. So.
And that's another area where I definitely went wrong. And I'll just touch on that very briefly. And if people have questions about it, like the whole red S thing and energy availability afterwards, then feel free to reach out to Heidi or myself on that. I've gone through it personally, like I mentioned in the case study. So there's really like 3 different things, main topics that I'm a case study for. And one is metabolic efficiency training. One is for UCAN and the sports nutrition and the training and the racing fueling gone wrong, and then fixing it. Using UCAN. And then the third one is this low energy availability. So I had experienced red S myself, a relative energy deficit in sport. And I didn't even know what was happening, but it developed over the course of years. And I had, again, been suppressing my testosterone levels through not feeding my body enough unknowingly. I had no idea that I was not actually giving my body the calories and the carbohydrates or whatever that it needed in order to sustain all the training that I was doing. I was training so much that even though I was eating more than your average person, I felt like I was stuffing myself full of food. It still wasn't enough to keep up with the training that I was doing, because I was just training so much. It was like 15 to 18 hours a week of really fairly intense training in the lead up into different Ironman events in particular. So that was a learning experience. It impacted my testosterone levels, which then impacted for me fatigue. I had some crazy chronic fatigue. Some brain fog, like cognitive kind of impairment, and my libido was crushed. I mean, I would go like 2 weeks without even wanting sex, which is weird because I was like 27 years old at the time. Eventually, it kind of like came to a head, and I was like, wow, there's something going on here. And those are the main symptoms that kind of made me realize what was going wrong. So I was able to correct it since then. My testosterone levels are back to normal. My bone density had taken a hit over the years, and I ended up having a stress reaction in my femoral neck. That's been somewhat coming back, but that's a lot harder to repair. But that's all I'll say for that on now. But just to like know that, make sure you're eating enough. And Heidi's been kind of sounding that alarm too, making sure that you know that it can happen. So as you're training, make sure you're supporting it. So going back to case study, the let's say on the metabolic efficiency training side of things, I had been, actually I'll touch on both metabolic efficiency training and UCAN at the same time, with the story about how I came to both of those things was the fact that I had lots of GI distress, which you mentioned on several occasions, Heidi. I had a lot of GI distress in my especially my longer workouts and races, like in my Ironman races that I first started doing. And I was able to kind of fake it with my nutrition approach when I was doing shorter events. But then once I got up to the Ironman distance, there was no more faking it anymore. I needed the expertise of somebody like Heidi, but I was honestly too cheap to reach out and do it. But it cost me a lot in terms of time and effort and race entries that I just did not live up to my potential. So I did Ironman Lake Placid in 2012. I did Ironman Lake Placid in 2013, and I did Louisville, and I did Kona that year. And in all four of those Ironman events, I had GI distress. And the GI distress happened exactly as Heidi mentioned before, with this like palate fatigue, sugar overload that happened toward the end of the bike early run. And then because I was having the sugar overload and the stomach bloating and the stomach aches and the porta potty stops, I could not take in any more nutrition. And then I stopped taking it in. And of course, lo and behold, 45 minutes later, I'm bonking and joining the Ironman Death March with everybody else. So it was a brutal experience 4 times. And finally, I was like, all right, I need to get this dialed in. So finally, after four failures, I reached out to a sports dietitian. Actually, it's one of Heidi's colleagues. I didn't know Heidi at the time. And she helped me dial things in. One of the first things that she did was recommend UCAN. And I started using it in my training, had a lot of success with it. And then I'll get to the sort of the punchline in terms of my success with it. But along the way, she was also teaching me metabolic efficiency training. And I was implementing some changes like Heidi described, fairly simple changes in my diet to really balance things out in that 1-to-1, 2-to-1 type of ratio, depending on the type of training that I was doing. And this was the progression that I saw in just 5 weeks. Now, everybody's different. You may not always see the results that are happening this fast or this impact, this dramatic over the course of 5 weeks. But I made these dietary changes, and my ability to burn fat and tap into my fat stores, like Heidi mentioned, tens of thousands of calories worth of fat, meant that I didn't have to take in as many carbohydrates to fuel my performances, because I was able to rely more on those fat stores and preserve those limited 2,000 or so calories worth of glycogen stores. So you could see here in the more faded outlines that at Ironman race pace, target race pace, I was burning 38% fat and 62% carbs. And then after metabolic efficiency training at the same pace, just 5 weeks later, I was burning 60% fat and 40% carbs. You can see, like, just let that sink in for a second. I was burning a lot more fat, 38 to 60% fat at the same pace, 62% carbs down to 40% carbs at the same pace. So it was a remarkable shift, and it allowed me to burn fat and preserve the glycogen stores, be able to take in fewer calories and perform optimally during these races without the GI distress. So the GI distress was cured between metabolic efficiency training, not needing to take in as much, and UCAN. And for the very first time in an Ironman, I had no GI distress, no bonking issues at Ironman Maryland in 2014. And I ran 20 minutes faster off the bike than I ever had, partly because I was just able to run the whole time instead of having to stop at porta potties or walk or bonk during the mile 15 of the marathon. So I was able to run the whole way. I ended up running a pretty darn steady marathon, running 3 flat off the bike. It was 20 minutes faster than I ever had done. 51-minute PR in the race. I went 8 hours and 51 minutes and ended up winning the whole race overall. So for me, this was like this mind-blowing epiphany moment. Like, why is everybody not already using metabolic efficiency training? Why is everybody not already using UCAN? Because this really, like, especially if you've done a GI distress before, but even if you haven't, like, it sets a foundation of health and allowed me to perform at a whole new level. Nutrition was finally working for me instead of against me. So it was this remarkable transition for me, this epiphany moment. And one of the reasons why I'm so excited to share it with you, because I can see in my own experience how impactful nutrition can really be. I think I'll stop there because I don't want to take too much time telling you all sorts of stuff about, maybe I'll just reference those slides if we need to, but I do want to make sure we leave enough room for questions for everybody. Oh, we got somebody here asking a question. So what's the difference between UCAN Energy and just super starch? Is there a place for each? And how would the powder complement the solid bars, for example? So UCAN Energy is basically the same thing as the just super starch. The super starch alone is just plain super starch. The UCAN Energy just has electrolytes and natural flavors added. So this plain super starch is actually where we started, or where UCAN started back in about 2011, 2012. That was the only thing available, and it was honestly like the plain super starch is really not very palatable. It's like chalky water, and it's so much
Really needs to be mixed with something.
Yeah, you mix it with other things like UCAN Hydrate, for instance, but you really don't want to be taking it by itself. Most people are not that hardcore. It's like chalky water, like I said. So you take people have the UCAN Energy instead, which is much more palatable. I think it's delicious. I look forward to drinking my UCAN bottles instead of dreading, drinking the sugary stuff that I had to use before. So that's the difference. It's really like not a lot of difference in terms of its impact and the way that you would use it. It's just the plain super starch is plain, as the name suggests. How would the powder complement the solid bars, for example? Great question. I'm going to share one slide which explains a little bit of the how-tos. So here we go with dosage recommendations. So you see there's one bar here. You see there's one scoop here. One scoop is relating to UCAN Energy, the super starch powders, and one bar relating to the super starch bars, which again also have super starch in them. They're approximately equivalent. So everybody's a little bit different. Some people prefer fluids, some people prefer solids. So you might find that on your training rides, you use bars, but in races, you might use only fluid. That's how I operate. Some people, like during an Ironman, when they're out there for so many hours, they might want to lean towards having bars as well, something that's going to have a little bit of that protein, something a little more satiating that you can actually chew, something just for a variety's sake, not just drinking the same thing all the time. And then I have one pouch on here as well, because many of you may have seen, trying to get it so it shows up, many of you may have seen that UCAN Edge launched, which is essentially UCAN's version of a gel, but it's really premixed super starch in a pouch. And this is approximately equivalent to one serving of the UCAN Energy powders. Now you don't have to mix it yourself. You just have it all premixed in a packet. So it's really, really convenient.
Yeah, and Matt, if you, I've got my last few slides on training nutrition. That kind of segues into that pretty nicely.
Oh, perfect. Then I stopped sharing, so you can share now.
Perfect. Maybe.
And while Heidi's doing that, if people want to just keep throwing their questions, you can also, because we got a small group, feel free to take yourself off mute and put yourself on camera. There we go. And you can do that anytime, and you can ask a question, especially after Heidi's done with these last two slides, and we'll open it up.
So these last few slides are really just kind of the before, during, and after training for the most part. And before training, like I said, if it's super early in the morning, getting just 100, 150 calories in, something small, is fine. Generally speaking, you want to get about 30 to 90 minutes before training. You want to get something in. I really don't like people to go more than 90 minutes. Mostly carb, a little bit of protein, just for, again, blood sugar stability, keeping it overall low in fat and fiber, just for digestive distress. So UCAN bars can be great. UCAN Energy or Energy Plus Protein. Again, like the further away you get from training, the more complex it's going to be. And so if it's 30 minutes before, that's where something like just a UCAN Energy would be good. But if it's 60 minutes, you might need to have a little bit of protein, and you want to do a bar instead. You can also do something like 4 to 5 dates or a banana with some nut butter. Again, not wanting to do the dates or the banana by themselves, just because the blood sugar spike. Toast with butter or peanut butter, small quesadilla, simple sandwich, peanut butter filled pretzels, something along those lines. Always aiming for kind of that combination of carbs and protein, and never having the simple sugars by themselves. And then during training, anything you want to take in fuel, anything really over 90 minutes to 2 hours. Women, I generally say 90 minutes. Men can go something closer to 2 hours. Again, that has to do with some of the differences in our kind of chemical makeup and our hormones. Generally start fueling about 45 to 60 minutes in. And then a lot of recommendations are going to tell you you need to fuel about every 30 minutes. But like Matt said, with UCAN, you can really push that back about every 60 minutes because you're not seeing the spike and the crash like you do with a lot of other simple carbohydrates. And so in my own kind of journey as well, like I found that I can go longer on 25 grams of super starch than I can on 25 grams of hammer gel or whatever else I used to use. And that does help with the GI distress in huge ways. So oftentimes if you are using UCAN products, it's getting kind of something in about every 60 minutes, you're serving every 60 minutes, but if you're using something else, you're going to want to fuel about every 30. Making sure the fuel is easy to digest and really limiting fructose. Fructose is pretty common in most gels, pretty much all gels, which is why UCAN is the only gel that I recommend. Fructose can also be found in a lot of other sports nutrition products, and it's easy for our digestive tract to kind of overload on fructose, again, especially women. So women have about half the absorptive capacity for fructose as men do. And so fructose can cause a lot of stomach issues. And so generally, steer people away from that. You've got, again, a little list of things that you can use. You can, as well as some other kind of whole food options if that's your jam. Generally saying, Matt kind of brought this up, the longer you go, the more you might need a little bit of fat and or protein, especially once you tap past that 3-hour mark. Anywhere from 5 to 15% of your calories are going to come from your muscle tissue. And so if you can get a little bit of protein in for anything over 3 hours, that's going to really help prevent that muscle protein breakdown. And then getting your recovery nutrition is super critical. Wanting to get something in within 30 to 40 minutes, 25 to 35 grams of high leucine protein. So that's either a plant protein that's going to be high in leucine like pea, or a combination of, pea and brown rice and that kind of thing, or, a whey or a casein or like, a milk-based protein are going to be your best bets. The amount of carb depends on a lot of things. It depends on, was this training or was it a race? How long was it? How hard was it? When is your next training session? When is your next meal? Knowing that a little bit of carb is definitely important, but the amount will depend on kind of what the rest of the picture looks like. And then also keeping it low in fat and fiber, just because those, again, are hard to digest. And if you're taking in things that are hard to break down, it's going to slow your body's absorption of the important nutrients like the carb and the protein. And then again, I've got a list here. You guys can reach out to me if you want. I've got some great recipes incorporating UCAN into a variety of things, like my UCAN protein pancakes, which are hands down a staple in my life. And so those can be a great recovery food. And as well as yogurt with UCAN's like snack mix. They recently came out with their essentially version of a granola. They have a vanilla and a chocolate, and they are both mind-blowingly delicious. As well as things like smoothies, sandwiches, eggs can also be great options after training. So this is just an example of some of my solutions with UCAN. I'll throw the energy and protein into smoothies. I make UCAN protein pancakes, or just basic like pancakes, even using the basic super starch without the protein if I want to have them before training. Actually make my own like jellos using UCAN, and I'll have those pre-training or during training if I'm on the bike, using the hydrate, and then a variety of different bars, which I think go very well with coffee, but I think most things go well with coffee. And then it's always good to just track kind of what works for you and what doesn't. Fluid, calories, sodium, just keeping an inventory can be really beneficial. And then I always have my athletes just kind of keep track of their energy levels over the day. Ask themselves, do they have energy for training and competition? Do you get a source of protein or slow carbs with meals? How's your recovery? Like, these are really easy things to just ask yourself to check in and say, like, how is my daily nutrition? Like, how am I doing? Just keeping in mind, kind of tying it all together, like what you're eating day in, day out, just for your basic meals and snacks, are going to have a huge impact on your training. So not neglecting the impact of that daily nutrition.
Awesome. Let's open it up to questions here. And while you guys are thinking of your questions or taking yourself off mute and putting yourself on camera or typing them into the chat, any one of the above, I've just drawn 2 winners for the, I'm giving out 2 $30 UCAN gift cards. And the 2 people that just won are Jacob P. Portucalian and Rachel or Rochelle. I'm not sure the pronunciation, sorry. But the 2 of you just won. So email me at this email address, which is also the one that I emailed you from earlier today and yesterday. And you can claim it that way. And then I also in the chat shared the club discount code or the club discount link. So if you click through this link here, it'll take you, actually I'm just testing it right now just to make sure it's good, but yeah, okay, there we go. So click through and then it'll automatically apply the club discount, which I believe is 15% anytime on anything on the site except the bundles. The bundles are already discounted up to 20%. So with that one, you wouldn't get an additional discount, but you get incentivized to buy a bunch of things at once. And the things that I direct you to are, well, the bundles are great. You can look at the different, products that are in there, but the Edge, absolutely. And that is selling like crazy. And we did a production run that is fading very quickly. And it's looking like we're gonna sell out well, but it's a good problem to have, but we're gonna sell out well before our next production run comes in. We're trying to expedite the production run so that we don't hit an out of stock situation. So if you do wanna try Edge, which is that pouch that I held up before, then make sure you get it very soon. Heidi just shared her bio and a linked book. Awesome. And yes, Arissa, do you have a question?
Oh, thank you. Did I raise my hand? Well, I did have a question.
You're on video, so
yes.
I figured you might.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so once in a while, I'll notice that, not during, maybe like after or towards the end of a workout, my fingers and my toes will cramp. Before, like if I swam a long time, my whole foot would cramp and hydration took care of that. I don't know if like just my fingers and toes, is that still hydration related or could it be something else? I also started taking magnesium supplements.
Is it did you say it was a specific type of workout where that happens? Like, is it running?
No,
is it biking? Is it swimming? Is it all of them?
No. I even had my hands cramp up when I was playing ukulele for over an hour. So I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be, something I'd have to like dive into a little bit more with you. Yes, like there for sure could be hydration and electrolyte imbalance. And I'd want to check out, are you taking enough electrolytes? Are you looking like what does your sodium intake look like? I'd also look at like supplements, medications, there's a lot that can play into cramping. And so yes, like hydration and electrolytes could be it, or there might be something else going on. And yeah, magnesium is, did you recently start taking the magnesium?
Yeah, a couple months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, there, I think there can be a variety of things that can kind of play into, why cramps happen, more than just hydration.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
We're at 7 o'clock now, but we're happy to answer any more questions that you might have and go a few minutes beyond. So don't be shy. Okay. Well, if people do have questions, always feel free to reach out to either myself or Heidi. We'll be happy to answer questions. We're also going to send out the recording in case you want to watch it again, or obviously for the people who missed it, or if you missed part of this, then you'll still have the recording and maybe you can go back and reference it too. So yeah, I think you've got Heidi's bio, her contact information, you've got her book there. So you should have a whole bunch of resources if you want to go down some rabbit holes and learn even more.
Fun rabbit holes.
Yeah. I geek out on this stuff all the time. I love it.
Alrighty, guys. Thank you so much.
Right.
Yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions. You can shoot me an email, send me a message on Instagram, whatever it might be.
Have a wonderful